Our program is called Mino Bimaadiziwin, which means living a good life. And it's fully supported by Lakehead Public Schools. So this is a program that's available for, actually it has two groups, 1 week for one group of students, 2 weeks before school starts in August. And the grade 8s involved in the program, they have 2 weeks of this program. And we do it outside of school, but just before school starts, and Lakehead District School Board covers all the costs for all of the students. Last year we had about 35 youth participate in the program. Some, it was their third year, some it was their first year. We had a couple of youth mentors. We still have a lot of learning and growing to do in that area to train and support our mentors and bring that into the program. You want to talk about the target age group?
Yeah, sure. So when we first started, we had grade 6 to 9 as the target age group. We've adjusted that a little bit. And originally the program didn't have the second week attached either. So it was really just focused on that 1 week of leadership and cultural teachings. And then the second year we shifted to have grades 7 to 9. So the students are 7 to 10. Are they completing?
So the kids, so we were, yeah. So the first year we had students who were even going into grade 6.
Oh,
so
okay.
the first year they were entering grade 6. So we targeted kids who were finished grade 5. We had kids who were entering grade 6 and up to entering grade 9. The next year we had kids entering grade 7 through to entering grade 10, actually.
Right.
Actually, we may have even added a couple of kids that second year who were entering grade 11, and with our aim of having some kids participate locally and then be potential mentors down the road. So it's that the target age group is definitely in flux. When we added the second week, maybe we should talk about the second week first. It's the second week is intended as a reach ahead credit for students transitioning from grade 8 into grade 9. So that first year we had a number of students, grade 8, grade 9, grade 10 maybe, who received a GLS credit, a General Learning Skills credit. And that credit was based on, they spent a full week. It's an overnight program, so they come to the university, which is where we receive the kids. It's one of our prime locations for the camp. They come there on a Sunday afternoon, and they leave Friday after a family feast. So they're with us for a full week. And then the following week, the students who are getting the Reach Ahead credit, the General Learning Skills credit, attend one of our high schools with one of our teachers who also participates in the camp. And she's there with the students for that whole week and connecting with them and gathering material. And then the kids do a lot of work around math, science, English, literacy skills in order to give them that step up and already have 1 credit under their belt when they enter into high school.
Yeah.
So last year, our third year, we were definitely targeting more students who were entering grade 9 next year. Or this past fall, they entered grade 9. So we still had students who were entering grade 8. The bulk of the students, I'd say half of the students in the camp were entering grade 9. And there were still a couple of students who were with us from the very beginning of camp who were entering grade 10. Or did we have any entering grade 10 last year?
I don't remember.
Yeah, we did. We had a couple.
Oh, yeah.
We had a couple. So that target age group, yeah, the target age group is definitely, it's in flux as we continue to reevaluate the program and look at what are the goals and what are the benefits and what's most supportive to students.
I think we started to see the opportunity to use it to help transition, which always was kind of the goal, to be able to help students connect in their schools. So we have people from the schools and teachers and principals, and then what they experience in the community that they build in the camp program, and that 1 week where we're together and so much learning, building that sense of pride, identity, and community together. So we wanted to be able to really maximize how we carry that into the school year, particularly for those students who are transitioning from grade 8 into high school, because it's such a new, like, everything's so new, and that can be a difficult transition. So.
All of the students who are invited to the camp, so we have a few target schools. Originally, the schools that we targeted were schools that were participating in another project we're doing called Connecting Anishinaabe and Western Ways of Knowing Mathematics, because we could have invited students from all over the city. Our first year, we had a maximum of 20 students. Last year, we had a maximum of 40. So you have to limit those numbers. So we had some target schools identified, and that has grown. One of the other programs that's connected to this camp, we have graduation coaches in 2 of our high schools. And they participated the last 2 years in camp. So we've definitely targeted schools where those grad coaches are. So it, again, as Nika talked about, building that sense of community and supporting the students to hold on to that sense of community and carry that forward into their school experience and have that be a source of support and strength for them, especially during difficult transitions, then that was important. So again, as we see the possibilities and the potential benefits for the youth, the program adjusts. So I think that really talks about the aim of the program. Our goal is to develop leadership, to develop confidence, and to connect that confidence and those confidence and leadership skills that the students are developing in that unique setting, to connect that to their school experience, which is originally why we started with kids going into grade 6. So we could provide them with opportunities to transfer those leadership skills in their elementary school setting, really build and foster that sense of strength and confidence, and then transfer that into the high school environment.
And what makes it different than other maybe leadership programs or youth leadership programs is that it's all very rooted in cultural teachings and cultural approaches to leadership.
And very connected to the community. This it is a school board initiative in that we, have all of the liability for students and cover the bulk of the costs for students, but there's a very strong connection with community partners in an effort to also extend those supports that the students participating in camp have available to them outside of the school day. So we work with the Thunder Bay Indigenous Friendship Center. Their staff plays a central role. They also provide support for the camp in snacks. There are all sorts of supports that they provide for the camp.
It's a key partnership.
Yeah, snacks makes it sound pretty trivial. It's not trivial when you're feeding and housing 40 kids for a full week. We also, and they play also a big role in programming and supporting kids. And many of those students are already connected with Friendship Center. Some of them are not. And so it also is an opportunity for them to reach out and build those connections and create more supports for some of those students in the schools. I think the other thing that's important to say when we talk about the target audience is we are targeting youth who otherwise may not have access to this type of opportunity or experience if the school board didn't provide it for them. So it's not something that we're really looking for kids who otherwise wouldn't have this type of experience. That's another reason that there's no cost to the program. We don't want cost to be a barrier for any of the students. The other community, I've only talked about the Friendship Center. I think we have to, the key partner and the reason that this program really started was from significant support from the Ministry of Education. What was at that time the Cap B division, and Danielle Blair, who has been doing this work in Connecting Anishinaabe and Western Ways of Knowing Mathematics with Ruth Beattie. So they had been doing a significant amount of training with their staff. They brought in George Cucci, who's a retired OPP officer, and supported the OPP to establish and run Nigamuswak, which is a program that the OPP run out of North Bay. I think they only have one program still. I don't think they have another location. And so we had the opportunity to participate in that training, met George, saw Nigon and said, oh my goodness, we could do that. We have an outdoor education center.
We could do that.
Ignorance is bliss sometimes. It's good to be a dreamer. And so we did. We ran the camp that year. Our goal initially, we thought we would run it at our outdoor education center, Kingfisher Lake. But there aren't shower facilities, there aren't full kitchen facilities, so we've done a morph. The first year we just did a day trip. I don't think we even did a day trip.
No, we didn't do any.
We did some work out on the land. We did some work out on the land, gathering spruce roots, things like that for the basket making component of camp. But the next year we did and overnight. So we included 2 days and 1 night at Kingfisher. And we'd love to extend that to 2 nights and 3 days. But it's a huge logistical challenge to be out at Kingfisher. There are also things around self-care that are an important part of the program, and having the kids have access to showers and things like that is important. And feeding everybody, just managing all of that would be difficult at Kingfisher long term. So OPP's been a huge partner, Ministry of Education, Thunder Bay Indigenous Friendship Center, and our local police.
Yeah, we have local police officers there, which has been such a benefit to see students be able to interact and get to know them on a personal level. They're not in uniform when they're there, and they're there all week, just, hanging out. And actually one of the officers even runs the archery that we do out at Kingfisher. So students get to connect, and then those officers have given us feedback about in the school year when they see them. At first they do the look away because it's a police officer move, and then they realize that it's him, and then they say, "Oh my goodness, hey, how are you?" And so they get greeted in a different way. They're able to build that positive relationship with those members of our community that are there to help them and support them. And also it's was our first year really crucial partnership with Lakehead University, and that continues. We have people from their Aboriginal mentorship program coming daily to be there and interact and build those relationships with the students, and if we stay in residence at Lakehead University. They're poor conference services people, probably. They deal with a lot, so we love that partnership. They're very good to us also.
I think it's unique because it's important for us as we reevaluated the program and said, could we bring it all out to Kingfisher so we could do the entire program on the land? It's always really neat to hear the kids have a key to their own room. They stay in residence. They really start seeing the university as their university and a place that they might come. We're all over the campus, so they get quite comfortable. And I don't know if I heard it last year, but that first year we heard kids saying things like, I can't wait till I come to LU and get to live in res. I mean, thinking, well, you live in town. You probably won't live in residence, but maybe. Just the idea that the kids are really considering that as, an option in their lives, and something that university belongs to them. It's part of their community as well. The other partner we didn't mention, who's been central to the work and another huge community that our youth are connected to, is Christina Ruddy from the Algonquin of Pikwakanagan. Christina connected with us through Danielle and the work that they've been doing in the math project. And Christina comes to support us doing the beading work, and she's just become a part of the Mino B family. And their community also has rallied around our kids. 1 year, their community, their youth participated in making drum bags and gifting them to our kids. She played a central role in our youth being able to go to Ottawa for a couple of days this year through the Ottawa 2017 committee. It's just been...
Ottawa 150?
Ottawa 150, yeah, it wasn't 2017, but Ottawa 150 for sure. And they covered the cost for all the students. It was an incredible experience for the kids. Teaching what subject? Healing. There's definitely a huge component of healing in camp. We tackle, the mornings are very heavy and challenging. Circles tackle subjects like dealing with grief and suicide, drug and alcohol use. They're big, they're tough.
The history in residential schools, they're heavy mornings and necessary, and again done in a very cultural, in a traditional kind of healing way, in circle, where the supports are there in the circle, and students have that to share, and then they're taken care of, and we make sure that that's done in a good way. And then in the afternoon it's a lot lighter and more fun, and they are able to
blow off some steam, get some of that emotion out, and they know that they have those supports available to them throughout the day. And kids open up, kids share with each other, they share with that community that builds and grows, and you really see it. I think last year was interesting because we had so many kids who were returners. The sense of community that became very visible on the the first 2 years. I think it was very visible on the Wednesday. It's a unique experience. Our goal also, we said, is to connect this to education, and that's can be challenging to do really explicitly and still keep all of those components. So we're really working on authentic traditional experiences that have those educational components and skills and experiences embedded within them, that they are at the core of that experience, like beading, and then trying to pull out some of that academic learning and have students see where that exists within those experiences. And then we do work throughout the year trying to support our schools to bring some of those experiences into the classroom. And that's a long journey, but we've begun it. And we talked about land-based. The 2 days out at Kingfisher play a huge role. When we do basket making, we have the kids involved in picking spruce roots. We've even taken classes out before the camp started to harvest birch bark, connect them to the land as much as possible. Language.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, there's a language component too, which we're working on making more embedded into the program. The first year it started out just there was a 30-minute language every morning, which we've continued, but now we're really looking to our language teachers who are there and language speakers to bring that in wherever we can. Something simple like naming the 4 groups that they meet in 4 groups, and that's how we kind of travel and arrange them. And it's east, west, south, and north. And so this year, instead of calling them east, west, south, and north, we used the Ojibwe names, which don't ask me to repeat them.
And I think Anika, that brings up a good point, that one of the ways is that we're trying to embed language more authentically is to support the adults involved in the program, so that we're thinking about to sit down with our language teachers and our speakers ahead of the camp and say, okay, what are the experiences? What's the language that we all want to be using, instead of it being this isolated thing connected. But we rely, that requires ongoing participation of the language speakers throughout the day to support all of us as a community to build that and make it a more authentic. So again, it's a long journey, but we're at the beginning of it.
There are so many things that I think make it an example of excellence. And I almost think you have to answer the next question first, where we talk about what is Indigenous education. But I think the fact that it's rooted in community is one of the biggest things that shows that example of Indigenous education. So I think that's kind of crucial when we're looking at the traditional approach to Indigenous education, to what our Indigenous learners need. It can't just come from one place. And so that the community involvement. And it also, I just like the way it shakes up the traditional idea of learning. So that second week when students get a credit out of it, the teacher has participated in the whole week before. And the teacher really works to tie those experiences together and bring it back to all the learning. So they see that whole week, it wasn't just fun. It wasn't just we went and had these cultural experiences, but they can see that there was deep learning, and there was learning that can be valued in the school within that week and within what they did. And then they can start to see that they are learners, that our ancestors had a lot of knowledge. They also were learners. And so they can make those connections. So I think that community base and just the different structure, but showing that we can learn in different ways, makes it, I think those are the 2 strengths that stand out for me.
In listening to Anika speak about that, it makes me think those students promptly view the credit as only the second week. The credit is the full 2 weeks. And that's evidence that our board, Lakehead District School Board, values those 2 often seemingly very different, a more non-traditional education experience and a more traditional North American. When I say non-traditional, I mean non-traditional to the North American school structure, that they value them equally, that week of learning within the camp is actually more highly weighted. There are more hours that the kids spend in that, and so that learning is really valued. And I think we continue to think about how can we connect that more explicitly for the students. How can we maybe have them think about at the beginning, okay, here are some experiences that you're going to try and capture over the course of this week so that you can document it next week when you're in the school setting, and help them see them as more explicitly connected and not two distinct experiences. We had this wonderful week, and now we have to do the school stuff connected to it, so that they see that it's all learning. Different forms of communicating about it maybe, but all equally valued learning.
I think it's a difficult one to respond to, and I would say that a lot of the population would go to the topic of Indigenous peoples when they're talking about Indigenous education. So they'd say, it's about teaching the history, an accurate history, which is kind of new in Canada, about Indigenous peoples and the story of the relationship between Canada and Indigenous peoples. And I think that is an important piece of Indigenous education. I think it's also then people consider how we are actually teaching our Indigenous students as one of the factors that represent what is Indigenous education, right? So what is our approach with those students? How is it different than students from other cultures? So that's one way to look at it. And then the other, which I think is more important, more widespread, is really looking at what are your actual approaches to teaching and learning that connect to Indigenous ways of knowing and understanding the world. And that is kind of, I don't know, that's where my mind is more, less about how are we teaching specifically Indigenous students, or how are we talking about how are we talking about the content of the history, and more about what does your approach actually look like, and how is that honoring the first people and the knowledge that they have and the knowledge that they carry, and how can that benefit all everyone? Yeah.
As a non-Indigenous person, that's why I said right away I'm going to defer to you, Anika, because first of all, when I think about Indigenous education, one of the places that I go to is my own experience as a non-Indigenous person, and all of the learning I've had to do and continue to have to do in order to even begin to think about that idea, what is Indigenous education. So I think as a school board, a big component of Indigenous education is providing learning opportunities for all staff, not just non-Indigenous staff, Indigenous staff, to participate in learning. And how do we engage in that learning? I think that's one of the other things that made this camp very unique. I'll go back to the partnerships. When we began the work with Connecting Anishinaabe and Western Ways of Knowing Mathematics, we had to identify who our advisory group would be. Well, they had done work in the past with one community and the school their children went to. And when I lobbied Ruth and Danielle and the ministry for us to be a part of that, I said, it's so exciting, the work and the learning that's going on within this program. And the reason you need to include Lakehead in this is because we're an urban Aboriginal community. Fort William First Nation is, I don't think of it as being a separate community. I'm in and out of Fort William First Nation regularly. My kids play hockey at the rink there. It's not off and away. I'm sure there are many people who live in Thunder Bay who haven't been on Fort William First Nation, but the youth and the families who live in Thunder Bay are not all members of Fort William First Nation. Youth from Fort William First Nation bulk of their youth go to our coterminous partner. And there are kids from all over Northwestern Ontario, from other provinces who are First Nation, Métis or Inuit, who are in our schools. So who represents those youth? So we spent an incredible amount of time gathering feedback from our community to say, who should we be asking to be a part of this? And I don't think you can separate that experience, that relationship building and reaching out to the community and learning as individuals and as an organization. I don't think you can separate that from whatever your definition of Indigenous education is. As far as my vision as a non-Indigenous educator within a system around professional learning for all of our staff, for our teachers, for all educators, for support staff, for custodial staff, for board office staff, for everybody. My vision and my hope and my dream for Indigenous education is that any person employed by Lakehead Public Schools will have a much deeper, more accurate understanding of the lived history of First Nation peoples within this country and of the work that we all have to do together and individually to reach reconciliation. And I think if everybody who's charged with supporting all youth in our system to learn and grow as a community, if all of those adults can learn and grow as a community and move closer toward a more accurate understanding of each other as individuals and as communities, that I think that's a pretty good goal. And how about you as a system? Because we operate in a system.
So, my goal and vision, and I see it happening, starting, I guess it goes back to just my third way of looking at it, rather than it being about simply content, but we have to do that, that's important. But for the system, and I mean like the documents that govern that system, to truly value and honor the Indigenous ways of knowing and learning and being. So, I think in my perfect world, in 10 years, classrooms would look very different. And honestly, I think it's very in line, like everything that I read about 21st century learners and preparing that and 21st century learning is a similar shift. And it's kind of going back to Indigenous ways, like oral tradition, sharing that it's not really about, a teacher instilling knowledge on these students, but more about awakening what those students already have, facilitating their learning. And I think that's happening. It's starting to shift. I see it. Maybe like it started at the kindergarten, right? Like full day kindergarten has that kind of, these guys are that inquiry approach. And I think that what I understand about Anishinaabe teaching, learning, is you develop that spirit that child has, and you support that whole child. So what I would love to see is more of that. Schools tend to be about one piece of a child, their brain, their mind. But to really develop like humans, it needs to be a holistic approach. You need to develop that whole human. And again, I think schools are starting to do a better job of that, and the system is starting to do a better job. And when I say system, I don't mean, I think Lakehead Public Schools recognizes and is making moves to change that approach, to do a better job. It's still difficult because we're working within a government system where often there's, tests, everyone gets the standardized test that tells where you fall. And then what does that do to a child's like spirit, right? Then they feel they're being told they're under something, or they're not where they're supposed to be. And I know one of the elders that I work with has shared before that in our language, there's no word for failure. You don't fail. You're just not there yet. You're just not ready. Maybe that's just not what you are supposed to do. That's not your gift. So you go here and you're successful there. And so in our schools, how often are students being told that they're failing, and that's not even a word that exists in our language. So, yeah, I think supporting that whole child more often, more explicitly.
I think as an institution, because a publicly funded school board is an institution, and it, like Anika said, it's a system, it's a structure. I think we need to have continued learning, and I'm really proud to be an employee of Lakehead Public Schools in this area, especially in the area of Indigenous education. I look at the opportunities that I have been afforded as an employee of Lakehead District School Board to have this learning in Indigenous education, to learn more about myself and my country and my history and the people around me. Not, when I say the people around me, not in the content way that we were talking about early, but in the relationship way. The opportunities that our board affords for our staff to reach out and develop relationships and learn together with all of their students, and value that learning for all of our students, Indigenous and non-Indigenous alike. When I look at the supports and the structures that our public school board puts in place in an effort to respond to the needs of the whole child, our 4 high schools now have a tutor, Aboriginal Achievement Tutor. We've changed the name a couple of times. Aboriginal Achievement Tutor in each of the schools. We have an Aboriginal, I think that their title is still Aboriginal. They're called Graduation Coach in 2 of our high schools to support our students, to identify what are the barriers. They're not teachers. That's not their role. Their role is to identify barriers for the youth and work with the staff and the community beyond and the families to help remove those barriers for youth. So just the existence of that role says we're looking for ways to find what the barriers are for youth who identify formally or informally as First Nation, Métis, or Inuit that are in our system, and we are looking for ways to remove those barriers. I think that speaks volumes. So we need ongoing opportunities to do that work and that learning together.
Yeah, I would agree. I think there's less, what we need is less about resources or funding and more about relationships. We just need to continue to forge those relationships with our communities to be able to move forward and do the work in a good way, so that we're not always the ones deciding what our Indigenous students need or what we need to do for Indigenous education, but that it's truly the voice of a community coming together and deciding what we're going to do. And that's, and walking together in relationship.
And that requires learning. Requires learning together. I think the one thing that we haven't said, though, is how important time is.
Oh, yeah.
So talking about opportunities to build those relationships together and walk together, you need time to do that. Literally, within the day, within the work, within the schools. We've carved out extra time to do that with Mino Bimaadiziwin. But we also need time long term. We need to not expect that everything's all figured out. We need to be patient with ourselves, with our system, with each other. Not patient saying it's okay we're not there. Patient that it's okay we're not there because we're working hard together, and not to expect results immediately.
Yeah, I think that speaks to, when you look at the worldviews, like the Western worldview sees time in a linear, like there's a beginning and here's an end and we're just gonna get to the end as quickly as we can. Whereas the Anishinaabe Indigenous perspective is time is a lot more cyclical. And when it's cyclical, it seems longer because you're going around in these cycles and you're still moving. So instead of going on the straight line from here to here, we're kind of going in these circles around and around. And so the idea that, the idea of time, I think, is really very important in our classrooms in Indigenous education, or in education. It's like teachers have 75 minutes and they have to get through this curriculum, and so that time is very linear and there's not a lot of space.
Or we have 1 year with these kids.
Or you only have 1 year, you have to do what you can in 1 year, and you make changes, you support, and then if you don't see the results of it by the end of that line, then you think, oh, well, that, toss it out, didn't work. But it has only been through one cycle, and it's still doing work. So.
And originally, you did this for the circle, and I think of it as, when we think of it as a third way of knowing, that I see it more like this. There's still a linear nature because we are on a journey where we're traveling from one point to another. The destination isn't always static. That goal might be moving, and as you're learning, you're going to loop back a little bit and pick up some of the other learning and then loop back, and those loops might even overlap. It might not be one full loop and then we move forward to the next loop, but the willingness to acknowledge that time plays a big role in developing the relationships and in learning and growing together.